uh, largely as from a discussion coming out.
There may be some network problems, so let's wait for a few seconds. Joanna, can you?
Yes.
William there. Okay.
All right, I was having a problem unmuting. I think now that is fixed. So let's try take two. All right. Uh, okay, this is take two. Welcome everybody to what is now the fifth in a series of conversations that we have been having, a series that began last year with the onset of the pandemic, in which we try to look at the socialization of the Global Compact on migration and migration discourse today. It started off with a very simple exercise of going through each of the 23 objectives of the Global Compact on Migration and looking at its implications in terms of implementation and in terms of what's really happening on the ground in the lives of migrants themselves and communities that host migrants and people that work with migrants on a daily basis. So it was a very ground up kind of approach at understanding the implementation of the Global Compact, which is still to date the most comprehensive framework that we have on governance of migration at the international level. So this conversation went on and in different ways, in different series. Following that, we had a discussion with mayors. We've had a discussion on thematics, and this whole series has led us to come down to 5 kind of thematic areas, and which we've been looking at in the last 3 of these 5 series. When we are looking at these thematic areas, I've been pondering on it myself over the last week and in preparation for this fifth round today. I spent a lot of today just watching the news, and particularly what is happening at the Poland-Belarus border. And I've been asking myself, what does that mean? What is happening there? How does that weigh in on our conversations today? How does so much of what is happening in the lives of migrants weigh in on our conversations? And one of the issues that I'm wondering if that we might want to look at, a thought that was inspired in the very first round when we were looking at the objectives, and that was GCM Objective 5, when we talked about regular pathways. And when we talked about regular pathways, at that time, Javed Appiah, one of the panelists on that webinar, said this is the keystone objective. If we get this right, we will get migration governance right. Today, as we look at today's topic of a new social contract, I would like to ask us to reflect on what we are seeing in the news with regard to what's happening at the borders, at different borders, what's happening in the lives of migrants today as the world has come to a standstill. And as the world is slowly opening, what does it mean for labor migrants who are being deployed to countries of destination, or who are stranded in countries of destination, or who are stranded in countries of origin and can't go back to work? So there are many dimensions to this. So what does a new social contract mean in this context? And in the overall context, we must look at, as we are looking at coming out of this pandemic and looking at migration governance with new eyes and leading up to the IMRF, we might want to look at some key words within the Global Compact that defy meaning, that defy conceptualization, that are open to defining in an operational sense of the word by what we do on the ground or what we see on the ground. So for example, today as we talk about new social contract, what would regular pathways, more regular pathways mean in a world of new social contract? What would that mean? What would regularization, a rights-based regularization program, what would that mean in a new social contract? And would us addressing these two issues, regularization and more pathways, more regular pathways, would that address some of the issues that we will have coming out of this pandemic? Given that so many economies have come to a standstill, there is a need to jumpstart economies. There is a need for essential workers, from truck drivers in the UK to essential workers all over the world. And particularly now we are coming to the time of Christmas. We'll need the shop fillers, we'll need the shelf fillers, we'll need the grocery men, we'll need all sorts of delivery people who will largely make up in many countries of destination the essential workers or the migrant workers. So when we talk about new social contract, let us think of what is new, what should be new, and how do bigger discourses in terms of looking at migration governance with new eyes, with the eyes of a world that is looking different from what it was before the pandemic, in the pandemic, and new in the sense of hope moving forward. For us who have been in this journey for the last 2 years almost, I think this is a very defining moment as well, as this is the last in the series in this year. And we are going to go next year into the IMRF, the International Migration Review Forum, where the UN will have this big global meeting. Some of us are still licking our wounds, or some of us are still picking up ourselves from the fight last week in Glasgow, where there was this big push to save our planet. And we know that the outcome, no matter how one might want to interpret it, half empty, glass half empty or half full, and there's a lot of interpretation going on, we know that the international community did not rise to the occasion. That our children and grandchildren will suffer the consequences of a decision that could have been taken this time in Glasgow that was not taken. In many ways, an attempt, a moment to save our planet was passed by. We need to revisit where our commitments lie, where our passion lies, where our vision lies. We need to look at that again. I hope as we in this Globe People's Migration Challenge, we will use this round. And I thank all our panelists who have joined us and who will join us in this series. I hope that what we want to see triggered in this round and during this round, during this series, is that as we listen to our panelists, as we engage in our discussions, we have to take the fight back home. Meaning each one of us in this webinar today and in this series today will have to go back to our local governments, to our national governments, and ask that vital question: how seriously are you going to go to that International Migration Review conference that is happening next year? And what is the baggage you are taking with you? because it has to be a reform baggage. It has to be a new baggage. It has to be a baggage in somewhere in which we even talk about a new social contract. If we talk, where we talk about more regular pathways, where we look at these umbrella kind of concepts that in some way call are begging for definition, and a definition from ground up perspective. So I'd like to thank our moderator very specially today, brother Dong Tolentino from the Builders and Woodworkers International from the Regional Asia Pacific Office, who has stepped up very willingly to do the moderation today. Dong has been involved in migrant workers' struggle in organizing migrant workers in the region and beyond the region for a long time now. And Builders and Woodworkers International has been one of the leading trade union, global union federations that have taken this issue up of migrant workers. I'd really like to thank Brother Dong for taking this, for making himself available and being with us in this moment today. So thank you, Brother Dong, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, William, for a very kind introduction, and also, of course, setting the context of the discussion. Very at this conjunction, you mentioned, of course, the crisis in the Poland and Belarus border, as well as the recently concluded Glasgow COP26. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, depending on your time zone. We are pleased to have you here on our round 5 of the People's Migration Challenge. We have a distinguished panelists, as you can see in the program. But just to add on a little bit on the subject of our discussion, of course, William has already mentioned the discourse on the new social contract, and there are other. And if you have seen the summary or the poster or the social media card that we are using in this discussion, there are interrelated elements to the new social contract. There is, of course, the decent work, and for unions, it has 4 important, also interlocking elements. Of course, the employment must be freely chosen, the right to organize social dialogue and social protection. And then we also have the access to justice for migrant workers. That is particularly important in the last 2 years outbreak of COVID, in the light of wage theft. And of course, we have the empowerment of women, and overall, to put this together, how to organize and use our power collectively. We are used to the format of our webinar now. We will have rounds of exchanges with our panelists on these interlocking, interconnected elements, if you like, within the umbrella of the new social contract. And we will also entertain contributions from the floor, and we will start now. Okay, our first speaker is Miss Carol Baxter. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She is the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration, and Youth, and Head of the International Protection and Equality and Integration Division from Ireland. Good morning, Ms. Carol. With this context of what William has said, what is your take on these interlocking elements of new social contract, decent work, empowerment of women, and of course, access to justice in this current conjunction?
Thanks very much for the invitation today, and very pleased to be participating. So Ireland, like other countries, the pandemic has revealed crucial things about our economy and about the world of work. as for others, it confirmed the importance of migrant workers within our economy, particularly as frontline workers working in the healthcare sector, logistics, retail, hospitality. A thing that we didn't know and that the pandemic revealed was that asylum seekers were also working very effectively, both in the healthcare sector and as care workers. So it really, really revealed the crucial importance of migrant workers to the Irish economy. One of the things that the Irish government did from the beginning, and this was very crucial, they wanted to make sure that people could follow the public health advice during lockdowns and could be safe during lockdowns. And in that context, the government realised very quickly that there was a need for income support. And so very early, a support payment called the Pandemic Unemployment Payment was established. And crucially, that was available to all workers, including undocumented. The key thing was to make sure that people were safe, weren't trying to go to work when it wasn't safe to do so. And very much that kind of approach of being flexible, of understanding that people are working in diverse situations in our economy were a key part. Sorry, were a key part of our response.
Go ahead, Ms. Baxter.
So
Yeah, sorry about
in
that.
terms of the interlocking elements, the interlocking elements make a great deal of sense. They're coming forward for you as a result of COVID, but we would say that they are probably key policy elements that would have been important anyway in an Irish context. We have a series of reforms that are happening not because of COVID, but directly linked to your interlocking elements. So, for instance, one of our reforms is an initiative to regularise undocumented workers. That didn't arise because of COVID, but actually the COVID pandemic and the crucial role of migrant workers in the economy has probably served to highlight to the government the need to take action now. So again, there's a whole process of regularization of undocumented workers happening at the moment. Separately, we have a process at the moment of looking again at our equality legislation. The equality legislation is the legislation which contains rights for all workers, including migrant workers, to be protected against discrimination. For migrant workers, it's on their race and ethnicity grounds. That legislation has been in place since 1998. There is a view that legislation needs to be updated. So the Irish government is undertaking a review of the legislation at the moment. And one of the things it's looking at is the redress mechanisms, access to justice, and if it's effective or not. Collaboration has been a big issue for the Irish system. We collaborate very routinely with civil society on both consulting civil society, but also including civil society in oversight structures. For instance, we have a migrant integration strategy in place since 2017, and NGOs are included in that oversight structure. I just want to highlight one key thing in which the government in 2019 established an anti-racism committee, an independent committee, which is formed of both civil society NGOs, trades unions, and also of independent experts. And that is working to look at the whole area of racism and is working to establish a national action plan against racism. The idea being to address structural racism. So it's an example of collaboration of civil society directly being involved in and influencing a key part of the process. We know that migrant workers are very diverse, and that your situation depends on your immigration permission. The government is working at the moment on a new model for accommodating asylum seekers, but as part of that, it has given asylum seekers the right to work and has reduced the waiting time for that entitlement from 9 months to 6 months. So the final issue in your interlocking framework is the whole area of intersectionality. The fact that impact is different depending on if you're a woman or a man, if you, your age, your situation, your sexual orientation. And there, the Irish government is working at the moment to look at the differential impact, but also we're using our national strategy for women and girls to look at the particular issues for migrant women workers in our economy. But we're also working with the OECD on a process to look at issues for men in terms of stereotyping and how they affect opportunities. So all to say, we see a lot of sense in your interlocking your approach. We think it is a good one, and very much happy to participate in discussing it. Many thanks.
Thank you so much for that first round of contribution. So many rich themes and elements that you've mentioned. And I will try to go back those that I have managed to wrote in my note here on the side. For one, you emphasize on the regularization of undocumented workers. Earlier, it was underscored by William on the regularization of the path and mention of the rights respecting regularization or pathway. And of course, from the trade union point of view, the current framework of circular labor migration, they're not even allowed to bring their family. They may be documented, but they may not be allowed, and they're only permitted to stay on a number of years. Otherwise, you have to go back home and wait for another year or so you can return, for example, to Ireland or other countries of destination to work again. And maybe even in some other sector of the economy, not necessarily on the same employer. So there are many variations of this. In your current policy that you're implementing on this regularization of undocumented workers, does it include elements of pathway for a residency, bringing the family, and maybe as I call it, PR or a resident permit to that effect, Ms. Baxter, on the first round of this exchange?
Yes, while we have different labor market permissions, some people, as you say, their spouses are allowed to work and some people aren't. And in terms of asylum seekers, if somebody gets a right to remain, that it doesn't always bring family reunification. But generally speaking, Ireland has quite a good pathway to residency, and the people who will be regularized will have the opportunity for residency and bringing their families, and quite a few migrant workers go on to become Irish citizens. We have, I think, 180,000 people have gained citizenship. So in a population of 5 million people, that's quite a large number of people who have taken citizenship, and they're mainly third country nationals, EU nationals. We have quite a high number of EU nationals working in Ireland, but they don't tend to take citizenship because they have entitlements as EU nationals. So many migrants working in Ireland, once they are legally resident, have the right both to have their families with us and a path to both long-term residency and citizenship.
Okay, I know there are colleagues in the call that would like to now jump in this discussion, but maybe one more that like a segue to the other colleagues that I can call on. Again, I'll go back to what William started in the opening, the crisis in Belarus and Poland border. If you are following the news and hearing, some obviously they're mixing the terms, migrants and refugees. Right? And of course, we know there are different regimes, international treaties governing these two specific, but sometimes also, again, interlock on the same manner of time and conjuncture. Again, if we go back to your regularization policy and programs along the way, what is the distinction of the labor migrants with this regularization pathway, and also extending assistance to refugees, but of course for political persecution and other reasons why they are leaving the country, not to work?
We have three categories of people. So the people who come within our regularization program are essentially migrant people who come not as asylum seekers, but people who came either as migrant workers and their permission ended and they or they had difficulties with an employer, or they came as students and have stayed on. So generally speaking, they did not come through the asylum seeker path. We also have program refugees who come to Ireland, and they are entitled to work in Ireland from the time of arrival in Ireland. For asylum seekers, they are now entitled to work after 6 months. So 6 months of lodging their claim for asylum. And obviously those asylum seekers, if they get the right to refugee status or the subsidiary protection, they all have the right to work. So quite a few people have the right to work in Ireland. The regularization related more to people who for some particular situation have become illegal, or there may be some small group of people in that who had never sought to become legal, who had never applied for permission, but that's probably small in the whole.
Thank you for that. And as I said, it's a segue because I would like to call a colleague from Malaysia, Sumi. And in Malaysia, there are more or less the same situation of labor migrants or migrant workers, asylum seekers or refugees from neighboring countries, particularly Myanmar, with what is happening with the coup d'etat, and also from other countries, Afghanistan, and lately. So Sumi, what is your take on this current discussion again within this interlocking new social requirement for new social contract? Sumi. Sumi? Or maybe we can go back to Sumi if she's not yet ready to take on the.
No, I think she's asking for the host to give up unmute her mic. Rakesh.
How can we? Okay. All right, there you go, Sumi.
Sorry, Dong. Yeah. So
Okay.
sorry
I
again.
hope
What was the
you
question?
heard what I've said. Yeah.
In what aspect do you want me to speak on the Myanmar situation?
Well, maybe you can not really comparison, but in some dimensions that what Ms. Baxter has mentioned, the distinction of the groups that we are catering. On one hand, it's very clear labor migrants or migrant workers, asylum seekers, refugees, but sometimes it's getting mixed on how these people are being treated. And from my limited understanding in the Malaysian context, there are also similar cases like refugees or asylum seeker from Myanmar or some other countries, like lately in Afghanistan, for example. And
yes,
how your NGO and are responding to these challenges, Sumi.
Yeah, so Dong, I mean, there is a clear distinction between the two groups. The vulnerabilities are different. And of course, the purpose of coming to Malaysia is also different. But unfortunately, the government sees them as all the same group of people, as illegal immigrants. So I think that is a concern, because one group, rather people who come for labor migration, have the option to go back to their country, if they wish to. But then refugees do not have that option, especially if they are facing persecution. But in terms of labor migration, labor rights, both groups, undocumented migrants, including refugees, face the same vulnerabilities. They have no right to work, and they also they face detention and arrest and detention. Only problem, I think the only difference once they face detention and arrest is that migrants are deported and refugees are not. So we do have a lot of refugees who languish in prisons for a very long time. And that's, I think that's a big concern, because they're not allowed out into the society, then they're also not deported back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I reckon you have heard what Ms. Baxter mentioned, that all these classification or groups are actually, if I heard it right, are allowed to work. No? Asylum seekers and refugees 6 months after. But is it the same case in Malaysia? If I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely not. I
yeah.
think that's unfortunately in Malaysia and a lot of the Asian countries, we do not recognize the right of work for refugees. So, but then of course refugees have to work. How else would they keep body and soul together in the country, in the host country? So they work in informal sectors. They don't get paid sometimes the minimum wage. They face a lot of labor violations. And I think the problem is we're not party to the Convention on Refugees. So there is a reluctance by the government to provide a right of work. Even the policy to right of work is not being considered in Malaysia. I think that is the issue that we have in terms of Malaysia.
And that makes the complication. You're a refugee and you're not allowed to work, and how can you survive? So you are in a way forced to be part of the underground economy, to be working as undocumented workers, and that complicated the matters. Exactly. I saw a colleague raising the hand. Annie Yeremian, are you raising the hand? Okay, let's wait for a few seconds. But maybe while the Annie is allowed to unmute, I would like to go back, Ms. Baxter, on some of the points that you have raised earlier. The collaboration and intersectionality that you have mentioned, particularly the importance of the collaboration with the civil society organization. This is a little bit biased on my side because I'm from the trade union. Is there also a model of trade union, CSO, and government cooperation on all these regards of the elements that we are discussing?
Trade unions are part of the collaboration process. When I say civil society, I include trade unions. So trade unions sit, for instance, on our migrant integration strategy. And they also, actually, the head of the main trades union sits on our anti-racism committee. So a very, very senior trades union member. So trades unions are fundamentally linked into the collaboration process.
That's assuring now to me as a trade union representative that we are part of this collaboration framework. Yanni has hand still raised. Joanna or Lisa, can you help to unmute, or is it accidentally like a packet call? Hand is raised. And
I've asked her to unmute. Maybe Rakesh can, because Rakesh is the host, maybe Rakesh can unmute or give her the mic.
Okay. We still have a few questions lined up to you, if you don't mind, back there. Now, at least in your context in Europe, right? You have mentioned, if I get it right, there is our emergence of the third country nationals. If I understand it right, the most or the current regime is posting directives of EU nationals, and they are expected to be accorded the same, more or less, the same standards in terms of wage, and even their social insurance and social protection are somehow portable, no? Whether they move within the, particularly within the EU member states. But lately, of course, you may have also noticed the emergence of what they call the third country nationals, right? Meaning foreign workers or migrant workers not coming from any of the EU member states, but facing many problems of being underpaid, not paid at all, no contracts and everything. At least in Ireland, are you expecting a similar emergence of these cases, and how your government is responding to this?
Yes, we have the same distinction, as you say. EU nationals have the same employment rights as Irish nationals. Third country nationals have to go through our immigration permission system or our work permit system in order to work in Ireland. But they are entitled, if you're a third country national or an EU national or an Irish national, you're entitled to go through our employment rights system if you experience exploitation from employers, if you experience discrimination. We have an organization, a tribunal called the Workplace Relations Commission, and that you can take a claim to that commission about your employment rights. And trades unions are very fundamentally involved there, and they can actually help you to take a claim. You don't have to bring a lawyer. So many people bring their trades union to seek redress. But you are right. The difficulty is that there are people who come to Ireland through trafficking, or through gangs who exploit, and we do have people who are operating without knowledge of our rights, and they can be very, very vulnerable. There is an NGO called the Migrant Rights Centre, and that helps to provide information to these very vulnerable migrants, on their rights. Because, if you're, say, a domestic worker, for instance, you may never meet, you may not be aware of your rights in Ireland. You might not meet somebody in authority to tell you. So that remains a challenge. You can still have people who don't have English, who don't get to hear their rights, and they can be subject to exploitation. But we do try to fund ways of getting to them. One of the things that COVID indicated to us, for instance, is actually that Roma again can suffer disadvantage, because even though they're EU nationals, they may not access entitlements. So actually that's been one of the things we're trying to have a system to give them information so that they are aware of their rights.
Oh, that's interesting input again. And in a way, it also brings us to one of the interlocking elements of access to justice, because you have mentioned the workplace relation, how they can submit claims. And maybe what is a particular distinction, because in many countries of destination, claims are treated sometimes, or more often than not, actually, treated as individual claims, despite this group of workers are actually working in one employer or in one work site. They have to belabor, the documentation of each individual case. They have to find their own lawyer, interpretation, and everything. And despite lobby of unions and CSO, this is not happening in many countries of origin, of destination of a country of work. How is it in Ireland in terms of collective or group claims? Is it acceptable? And can unions also represent them on the claims, or other organized group if they are, they don't want to or maintain anonymity of their condition?
Our system is a system of individual claims, so that the person does need to make an individual claim. A trades union can represent the person, but we do have, particularly interestingly, under our equality legislation, the right for the adjudicator to they can actually rule that a company must do a specific thing. So while a claim has to be taken individually, if the company has 50 people, all of whom have the same experience, the actual person adjudicating the claim can say to that company, you must correct this situation for everybody in your company. So while we don't have collective claims, we do have under the equality legislation some opportunity for actions to be required, which go to a structural issue.
Okay, that's a good answer to that. That's the distinction, but it's still an individual. But if the educator can, in a way, order the company to settle it for all, it's for obvious reason. I saw a raised hand by Musharudi, and earlier, Farah, I saw your hands raised. Are you okay? We call on first Musharudi, if
Yes,
can be unmuted.
yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
I just need a clarification from Sunitha Krishna. She mentioned that there is a violation of labor laws in Malaysia in many cases, particularly regarding to the refugees, Rohingyas from Myanmar. And another place she mentioned, Malaysia does not grant the refugees right to work. Yeah. So two things are different. So if there is no particular laws for the refugees, so how they are being dealt? They are being dealt with the existing laws for citizens of Malaysia or something else? Please make it clarify.
Sumi, did you get the questions, please?
Yes. No, they are deemed as refugees, but then the RSD process, the refugee status determination process, is done by the UNHCR. It's not done by the government. I can't say that the government recognizes the card for them to work. They don't, but they recognize the UNHCR card for them to remain in the country. So there is no written policy that the refugees can work, but they informally allow, the government informally allows the refugees to work in the informal sector, and also provided that they do not work where they have to face the public. So you will see a lot of refugees working at the back end. Example, if it's a factory, you will be seeing them working in the factory side, in the manufacturing side. They wouldn't be working where they have to deal with customers, so that is the type of work that they do. You'll find refugees working the construction, plantation, and so on and so forth. So this is how they survive. And it's really an informal sort of arrangement that the Malaysian government has with the UNHCR to allow them for work. In terms of medical, yes, they can access the government medical centers, the public hospitals, but they have to pay 50% of the foreigners rate. So these are some of the things that they do in terms of refugees. So there's no, I can't say there's a written policy. It is very ad hoc, and it changes every now and then. So this is something that it's quite difficult, I think, for a refugee to survive in Malaysia. in that way, because you do not know when the government is going to change the policies. So minimum wage also does not apply to them. I think the only saving grace that we have is the fact that the industrial court recognizes the right of refugees to work. So if the refugee is not paid or he is dismissed from his work, then he has a right of claim in the industrial court, not in the labor court. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sumi. Can we go back to Annie again? Because earlier she raised her hand. Sarah, I recognize you, but let's try to get Annie first, because she was first. Okay, we don't have yet. Okay, Farah, please. We take you in first. Farah?
Yeah, hello. And I'm sorry for not intervening first because I had a problem with my microphone. As mentioned by you, like sharing a Middle East perspective regarding the situation of migrants in the region. Can you hear me? Because there's a lot of noise. Okay.
Please,
so thank you. So sharing that and the situation of migrants in the region, especially talking about the Middle East, it is very critical because the situation coming from economic crisis is happening in the region, and political turmoils and wars and a lot of instability in the region is reflecting really bad on migrant workers in a way, in giving many examples on that. For example, the economic crisis happening in Lebanon is reflecting majorly on the wages of migrant workers. That's in the case that they are actually receiving the wages, because there is many cases of wage theft in the country. Wages have went from being up to $300, $200 to $20 per month. So there's an economic crisis leading to a decrease in a way of the rate of the Lebanese pound compared to the dollar. There's a lot of cases of in a way detained domestic migrant workers. We've had recently a case of a detained domestic worker in the house of the employer for 7 years. So for 7 years, this domestic worker was not allowed to get out of the house of the employer and was not allowed any external communication. In other cases, many cases of lack of access to justice in the Middle East, not only in Lebanon, many countries. And this is the case also in many other countries all over the world, including the MENA region. Economic crises, again, are really affecting on migrant domestic workers, the language barrier, the culture there, because in a way, many migrant workers in general are treated as a second-degree citizens in some countries, and they're not treated properly, and the culture has a huge effect in that area. So, and the problem of undocumented migrants also has a huge effect on their status, on their access to wages, on their access to justice. So many cases of undocumented migrants, and therefore many cases of undocumented migrant children. And the case of undocumented migrant children has many critical effect in a way, because, for example, in countries such as Lebanon, in a case where a migrant domestic worker has a non-documented kids, she is deported immediately. So many, in general, migrant domestic workers and many migrant workers are not allowed to give birth in Lebanon. So that's one of the examples. So the situation is critical. There's not much follow-up from a lot of NGOs, because there is not enough resources to support these NGOs, but there is always NGOs working for such causes, but there's still lack of resources. That's the overview on the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. And I hope you don't mind Mr. Jose Brillantes as a seasoned actor in all these discourses with your experience. What is your take on this, particularly on how do you view the national government authorities being an ally on these advocacies, sir? You have to unmute. You have to unmute yourself, sir. Yeah. Oh, one more. All
Okay.
right. Yeah.
This is okay. Yes, I was listening very intently to the last speaker, and these are normal, regular, if you want to call them that, happenings when it comes to domestic workers. And I can only refer back to the situation of the Filipino workers who go overseas. Yes, we don't have to look for the local civil society groups or the groups that are normally going to extend their assistance, because there is an embassy that takes care of this, and there is a big contingent in the embassy itself that does nothing but follow up on all of this. There is a list of the individual worker who has gone abroad. We know the details. We know exactly where they are going. And whenever there is an abuse, there is automatically a response from the Philippine agency, and there are quite a number. You have the Overseas Employment Administration. You have the Welfare Assistance Group. You have the Consular Assistance Group. And so they all immediately converge on a particular issue and take care of this. And if necessary, they will repatriate the worker that has a problem or that has been abused or who is illegal or who has been considered as somebody who went in without going through the proper processes. And there is always a response. And therefore, the situation envisioned by the previous speaker does not really happen when it comes to Filipino workers. But that's only because we have been in this particular situation for such a long time, since the early 70s, that we have all of the responses now. And even at that, there are many instances where we find ourselves short of the necessary responses in order to take care of the particular worker.
Yeah, just like a built-in programs and services within the Philippine missions in countries of destination or countries of work. Thank you for
That's
that.
right. Yes. As a matter of fact, just if I may just
please
finish off with that, because of this particular situation and how it has developed in the Philippine Congress right now, there is a pending bill that could probably be approved in the next session. And this is called the Department for Overseas Workers. Department for Overseas Workers. It is now a complete department, and the minister or the secretary is going to be a member of the cabinet. Yes, so that's how important it is. Thank you.
That's another webinar altogether, Mr. Brillantes, this proposal to establish this Department of Overseas Workers. But we have Yahya Mousa who has the hand raised. Can we have Yahya? I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Yahya Mousa, please.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Yahya. It's Yahya Adam. So,
please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to comment on the Sister Sumita's speech that's regarding the Malaysia. So refugees and asylum seekers in Malaysia, so they are facing, big number of the problems and challenge and issues. So in Malaysia, so regarding, the access into works and to education and also the hospital. So I do agree with her that, the refugees accessing on the government hospitals, giving them the 50% discount. So even this 50% discount, it's very, the expensive for refugees, high rates, So even if, the refugees accessing this 50 price, so sometimes refugees cannot, to pay this amount. So it's very expensive comparing to, you know, the locals people. So, and the other things also, the African refugees in Malaysia, especially they face, you know, the racism and discriminations, you know, in Malaysia here. So they suffer a lot, you know, the lack of rights, and also they face difficulties, even it's illegal works to find to work them. So there are many of them. So some of them, they face many issues after the works, you know, the employers not paying them their money. So and also the children, they cannot access the formal education in Malaysia. So the refugees in Malaysia here just only offering the education by the community centers. You know, this is also not considered as illegal, you know, the education. Only they supporting by themselves. So I just would like to ask question to Sebito. So what is the role of the NGOs to pushing the government so as to government at least give the refugees the rights? Or what is the plan for, you know, the governments, Malaysian governments, if there is any, for example, possibility to sign the refugees 1951 convention, at least refugees can get the access to right to whether works or education? And that is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, Sumi, it's obviously pointed to you, please.
Yeah, sure. We don't see the government taking any steps to sign the refugee convention, but I think the main issue is to push them at least to have a comprehensive policy on refugees' right to work. But you know, we nearly did have that policy when we had a change in government. But then we had another change in government, and unfortunately, this government is not very progressive in terms of rights, in human rights in general. So it's going to be a big struggle for us in the years to come, if while we are under this particular government, to push for any rights for that matter. So yes, like what Yahya said, that you know. Right to medical is a problem, and it's still expensive. The 50% payment is still expensive. We are a signatory to the Convention on Rights of Children, but then we have a reservation on education. So this is how we actually keep the refugee children or the non-citizen children out of the public schools. The schools that are run by community and private entities, these are the schools that refugee children and undocumented children access. They have access to these kind of schools, but it's still expensive. Yeah. Community schools are under-resourced. So we can only give them a very minimal, a very basic education, and they would not have a certification. So this is the issue when it comes to community schools. Of course, private schools are expensive. They do have CSR programs, you know, and where they give some sort of sponsorship and scholarships to refugee children and undocumented children to access schools, but it's very, very limited.
Yeah.
So I would say that we have not done really well in terms of refugee rights in Malaysia, although we host a very, very large number of refugees in Malaysia compared to any other country in the region.
In the region, that's true. Ms. Baxter, I hope you can still join us for some few minutes. I was informed that you'll have to leave for some other commitment, but I will just call John to make his contribution. John, what is your take on this new social contract, and particularly on the debate on the regular pathways? John, please.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, John. I'm happy to follow Sumi and her image of governments changing. Governments do change sometimes, you know, not in a great direction, but sometimes in a better direction. And I think that's the kind of moment we're in. That's the kind of possibility we have in some countries, not all of them, of course, and maybe nowhere near enough of them. But a moment in COVID time. You and others have made references, William, at the beginning, to the sudden value, at least, the sudden appreciation in words, at least, of essential workers, the sudden really hard reality of shortages in so many countries and so many economies. shortages of workers at all skills levels, and many of the migrant workers. That's hardcore. That's hardcore. It's economics. It's not just emotion. It's not just rights or justice, which have been hard sometimes to push with governments and others. It's money, and it's health, and so that's a very, very different moment than I think we've been in. And so it's a moment, as William said, and Dong Yu and the labor movement are so front line with this proposal, with this insistence on a new social contract, because it is a moment that's looking for new possibilities. And I think the power dynamic is different, not everywhere, but not nowhere either. It is a very different moment, and we can see it. Williams used the imagery of, the world has been shaken. Well, the world is still shaking, and we are seeing that, and it's very much touching the workplace and workers and migrants and living and moving conditions. So we have to recognize that, and step up into this new moment. And you're doing it with this new social contract. The one pager is brilliant. And Dong, you asked about regularization, and I'll stop with this. In the third sentence of the first box of the new social contract one pager, it refers to rights-based regularization. The Global Compact talks about safe, orderly, and regular migration. The International Convention on Migrant Workers that Mr. Brillantes worked so many years with as a member of the International Committee, and I remember those years, sir. They talk about regular pathways, regular migrants as having rights. They also talk about irregular migrants having rights. So they're not contradictions to say that we push for regular pathways. Of course we do. We push for regularization of those already in the country who either arrived in irregular status or fell into it for whatever reason. Regularization, because regularization, regular status is the surest way to maximize rights. It doesn't guarantee rights, but it gets people out of that dark hole of worrying every single day about being exposed to non-rights, to being the worst of the non-rights, including detention, deportation, and so on. So regularization is part of any social contract, new or old. The new social contract can raise that for migrants of all kinds. Sumi's as right as always that the situation of refugees, especially in the workplace, is very similar to that of migrants, regular or irregular sometimes, in abuses. And a new social contract has to address all of that. So more power to the trade union movement leading this conceptualization, and may we all wake up, because civil society, we've got to, as the world has been shaking, we have to shake ourselves out of thinking, we can't ask for more, or we can't ask for everything. Let's ask for it all. Let's recognize our unity on this. We are so together on all these fundamentals. And we know the reality of them, because so many of us are migrants and refugees ourselves, or have members of our family, past or present, who are migrants and refugees. And there's power and there's fire, as our colleague Pefi King has mentioned a couple of days ago. There's fire in that passion, and that together with the moment, that together with the need for change, that gives us power, I think.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, John. Ms. Boxer, William posted a very, I would say, a relevant question, of course, in our discussion. With these complexities of discussion on the social contract, we have to use, in a way, the reading of the question, the intersectionality that you mentioned, must go beyond the prism of the current categories of migrants or refugees. So what is your take on this, this question? If you can read it in the chat box, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that maybe the answer is the other way round. I don't think that we need necessarily to change the categories of refugee or migrant worker, but rather to recognize that refugees and migrant workers are themselves very diverse and that their experience will be different depending on whether or not they're able-bodied or not, men and women, their age, their family situation, and their sexual orientation. And so I think from the very beginning, I think it's important to recognize the diverse identities of refugees and migrant workers, and that from the very beginning, both civil society's response, but also government's response has to recognize that needs will be different depending on those diverse identities.
Yeah.
Hey, Dong, this is John again. Could I mention one more thing? I neglected to thank Ireland for its leadership on some of the most progressive movement for migrants at the international level in the past 20 years. And that's specifically with respect to the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, Ireland had such a direct and central leadership role in the Sustainable Development Goals that really were breakthrough on all of our issues, on rights and on protection and on labor, migrant workers. You know, it's the Sustainable Development Goal 8.8 that talks explicitly of protecting the rights of migrant workers, in particular women workers, and SDG 10.7 that actually is the mother of the Global Compact for Migration, because it calls for facilitating safe, orderly, and regular migration. But that process was government driven, and among the governments, it was Ireland in the driver's seat very much. So appreciation, Ms. Baxter, to your government for that enormous contribution that takes us forward.
Okay, and thanks for that additional note. I know you may be leaving soon, Ms. Baxter, but this is will not so I can have a good sleep tonight, because there are important elements in the interconnectedness of the discussion towards gender and women empowerment. Is there a particular affirmative policy and programs in Ireland that can inspire us in this current discussion, particularly focused on the empowerment of women, please?
And just to say that I totally agree with Willem on his last point, and thank you very much to John Bingham in terms of Ireland, very much appreciated. I would say that we are trying to develop our skills within our government to recognise the different impacts depending on whether or not the person is male, female, their situation. But one thing I would say, and that it might be useful for yourselves, is that we're actually using the OECD quite a lot. They're actually we've applied for funding to the European Commission, for instance, on a project that will use the OECD to support our government to look at the different impacts depending on the person's identity. So what we're trying to do is look at policies and how you really make sure that those policies have the impact that you want them to have, and really to be able to assess the equality impacts. And my sense is that the OECD is a very good resource. We found them really, really good, giving us access to very good case studies from across the world. So I would say that for yourselves, that look to the OECD, that it's really doing very interesting work on gender mainstreaming and equality mainstreaming.
Thank you for that. And I will call some other colleagues, but just be mindful if you need to go. Of course, we were informed, but in any way, in case that you'll be leaving at the middle of the discussion, we thank you this early in our current conversation. I I was informed that Ambassador Grace Princesa is in the call. Maybe we can also ask her to give her a perspective, particularly also on the discussion for these new social contract and regular pathways. Ambassador, are you still on the call? Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
This is a surprise, William. Well, I will just add to what our colleague, Ambassador Berlandes, our former secretary for undersecretary for migrant workers, that indeed the Philippines has been trying to do as much as it could. And I was ambassador in Abu Dhabi. William knew what I was trying to do there. And I've been following all of this. I never expected to talk, and now I'm talking. Of course, I was in the Vatican also lately. So I've been watching how the Vatican and the Pope has been trying to push the migration agenda in the international level. So rest assured, and as we say, we will have a change of government next year. So we hope that I'm watching, and that's why I'm attending all of this, so that I will learn globally and hopefully use the knowledge for the new government to be more focused, to have our new department. I was formerly Assistant Secretary for the Legislative Liaison, so I know all the dynamics going on. So, but I'm really hoping and praying that the Philippines can still continue the leadership that it's trying to do towards engaging with destination countries for bilateral labor agreements, and also for us here in the Philippines to continue the engagement locally, so that we can somehow be a light in the world of migration, especially because we are in 200 countries in the world. As William knows, he lives in the Philippines. So yes, let's pray for a government that's on fire, a civil society that's on fire, all of us on fire for this very important issue of looking at migrants as people. I read that, William. Yes, they're people before we categorize them as anything. They're people. So thank you. Thank you. And God bless us all. Continue fighting.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that perspective. Elian, I saw again Farah raised her hand. Is that a fresh raised hand, or it was earlier?
Yeah, I did raise my hand. I wanted to share with you some points, which is that even though we do see the government's intervention, we do not see actually government intervention or initiatives in the Middle East, but in many other countries, talking about the MENA region in general. But it is well noticeable in a way that awareness is raising among people. And in many cases, wrongdoers are being shamed when treating migrant workers badly. Although not as effective as taking action against these employers, but that is a step forward in a way towards spreading awareness and supporting the rights of migrant workers and treating them as equal. Unfortunately, again, the culture of discrimination is widespread, but CSOs are helping in that through spreading awareness. And they are, in a way, the ones providing access to rights and providing support. And that goes back to the point of access to justice and even access to health facilities and access to vaccination. So it's mostly civil society organizations connecting, supporting, and given the needed support, who are providing the needed support for migrant workers in general. Thank you.
Okay. William, I can call you, but Samia interpreter raised the hand. Is that a request to speak, or because it's an interpreter in the last name? Anyway, we can go back to that later. William, you raise your hand, please.
Hi, Carol, and I know you're gonna leave, and I just thought it would be important to put this question to you. I like how you started of how Ireland responded in the time of COVID, even to the point of giving kind of an allowance, a wage for workers, even those who were undocumented. I'm wondering, when we look at practices like that, what drives a state to respond like that? You mentioned OECD guidelines, but what drives a state? What was the thinking behind that led to such a quick kind of response, both from a human rights perspective, it's noted as a human rights response, as a humanitarian response as well. It has been noted, kind of thing. But what triggers such a fast kind of response by a state? Well, if you could share some of the thinking of what moved the state to act better, what was the rationale, in other words?
Should I come back?
Yeah.
Just to say that it was really two things. It was so that we could have an effective lockdown. That at that point, and this was March 2020. There was the sense that we needed to shut everything. So Ireland is good on crises and responding quite quickly on crises. I think it was also very much influenced by the fact that if you had that, also that idea that migrant workers have been so important in our economy, and that if you had that you needed, that our country needs to retain migrant workers. So that was also I think part of the piece. But the very practical motive was a public health motive, that you needed to make sure that people weren't forced into work because they had no money, that you needed to be able to close down parts of the economy for public health reasons, and to do that very quickly, and that it made sense then it was to spend the money on income support rather than to spend the money much more expensively on our health system.
That's a very interesting response, and I reckon it's of course on the collective cultural values of the nation, of the state, as regards human rights and how you treat the people, that I believe will make a difference, and particularly on the specific point in time, the leadership in the current seat of power, but of course that is also involved the organized communities, including trade unions, civil society, homeowners association, and so on. Because I remember when Germany, for example, welcomed the refugees and migrants, the people in the neighborhood came up, outside, welcoming them. It shows the values of the people, of the community. William, you also mentioned when we start this conversation about all of these action points and advocacies will have to be weaved as our common path going to the IMRF. And lately there are many position and a lobby for the IMRF. And John, we have this latest statement in one of our global network on social contract. Would you like to give this just an overview on how this can be taken leading to IMRF, John? Thank you, Ms. Baxter.
Thank you.
Yeah, be safe.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dong. Yeah, I think you and William could speak on this better than I could, because you both have been among the group of maybe 20 different leading organizations that have been trying to put together this unified statement of positions, these common positions of civil society, trade unions, and other non-state actors towards the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. And as part of that, not necessarily the heart of it, but part of it is the International Migration Review Forum, because the focus in the prize, the eyes on the prize, as Martin Luther King used to say, is on implementation of the Global Compact. But it's a unified civil society statement of priorities, of burning priorities on implementation of the Global Compact, always rights-based. But it goes across some what the title of the document says are 12 key ways for states to get back on track. And then there's an opening section that refers to this historic moment we're in that you described and William described and others have described in COVID time, and with a recognition of essential workers and all the shortages and all the abuses and awful policies in COVID time, and then some of the surprising practices like those our Irish colleague just described. But in more than a few countries, some surprising practices, alternatives to detention, some regularization and extension of visas, even to irregular migrants, some access to services, including vaccines. Again, not everywhere, but not nowhere. So, the 12 key ways go on to talk about the climate situation and displacement. One of the first times broad civil society actors from around the world have come together with a statement on displacement. Very much inspired by some of the work in webinars like this one. A section on migrant workers, and that's what I want to touch on most of all. But it goes on into access for services. It goes on into racism and xenophobia. It talks about in just about every area of migration policy we care about, returns and so on. But in the section on protecting worker rights, there's direct reference to the new social contract, and it's in final draft form. Again, 20 leading groups worked on it. It's going out to the Civil Society Action Committee for finalization, final voting by tomorrow. Dong, I saw BWI endorsed it yesterday, or maybe today, and Migrant Forum in Asia, many of the sponsors of these webinars as well. But here's what it says. It says, as a major priority of civil society worldwide, and as a key way for states to get back on track for implementation of the Global Compact, civil society calls for, quote, work towards the creation of a new social contract for migrant workers between governments, workers, and employers. This new social contract, and again, using William's opening words, we make the definitions. We make these definitions now. But this new social contract should include a universal guarantee for all workers, regardless of nationality, sector, or status, that all labor rights are to be respected and universally applied, particularly the freedom of association, right to join unions and bargain collectively, jobs are decent, social protection is universal, due diligence and accountability are driving business operations, and that social dialogue ensures just transition measures for climate and technology. So that's this social contract definition driving the united civil society priorities and advocacy on the Global Compact towards this international migration review process that finishes in May of 2022 and beyond. And so it's mainstream, and I think it's gathering momentum in this moment.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's the statement. The remaining 3 minutes or so of our time, I will call on Eva Sandis, and then I saw you, Brother Abul Hussein, and then I'll pass it on to William to make an attempt to conclude this very rich discussion. Is Eva Sandis still in the call?
Hello?
Yeah, okay. We can have you first, Brother Abdul, yeah, please.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm Abul Hussain from Bangladesh. I'm working with the Bangladesh Migrant Workers Forum.
Okay.
So I want to know how you have any assessment to the how much waste if the pandemic period all over the globe. So do you know the Bangladesh is the sending country, and in the last 2 years, pandemic time, 1 million workers come back.
Yeah.
Women, and they have no carrying any money, no ticket, no passport, no valid documents. So there are mostly losses, the all type of source. So can I ask you, have any plan to any take care of those who lost everything in the during the pandemic period?
Yeah, that's the wage step issue. That's I would say, William, a good segue to pass it on to you, because it's a question of whether we are individually or collectively have any records or study of how much an indication of wage step is involved, and then of course you can conclude this very rich discussion. William, please.
Dong, do you want to see if Eva is still coming on, or?
I was told that she left.
Oh, she left. Okay. All right. Look, thank you, Dong, for an excellent moderation. We do apologize for our other two panelists who were not able. There was a sudden emergency in Togo. I hope it is not very serious, but there was an emergency in Togo, as a result of which our representative panelist from Togo was not able to participate in today's call. And the representative from Bangladesh, who was also supposed to join us, we were not able to get in contact with him. Again, something must have come up. I just hope both those panelists are safe, and it is nothing too serious that should raise that we should be concerned about. Thank you for all the thank you for Carol and she's left already, but for some of the thoughts that she put out at the very start. And I like how she said, I think the response of that government in a time of crisis only demonstrated again a sense of how we understand the role that migrants play in our communities and in our societies. I have been thinking about this, the new social contract, today's discussion, and what has been said, and what has been said from the flow as well, by different people, by Secretary Brillantes, Ambassador Princessa, John, Farah, Sumi, and some of the questions that were raised in the chat box as well, with regard to refugee and refugee and the protection for refugees. It's very interesting that in today's conversation, we went between these two categories, refugees and migrants. We talked about the right to work for both of them, and we've talked about their vulnerabilities as well. My own day today has been one of attending the interregional ILO Africa Arab interregional conference on labor migration, and I'm wondering, when we look at all this and listening to today's conversation, when it is time for us, and this last comment from Abul Hussein, of migrants who have come back in this time of pandemic without wages and who have been deprived of any support, even in the country of origin, and find it difficult to cope in these circumstances. When we look at what has gone before us and how migrant workers have been perceived, and we look at some of the temporary labor migration programs and the exploitation and abuse that happens with them. Dong was referring to, and you see Dong, myself, and somebody else, Sumita, have behind us in our background a campaign, Justice for Wage Theft, which highlighted how many migrant workers have come back, millions have come back without wages and things like that. So that whole question of access to justice for migrant workers in terms of end of service benefits, wages, and things like that. Many migrant workers have not received their wages for years, if months, if not years, kind of thing. Then we look at the whole question of their vulnerabilities, and we looked at women migrant workers, domestic migrant workers in this time of COVID, particularly, and the pressures that were on them, the stresses that were on them, the exploitation that happened within their context, kind of thing. And then we look at also migrant workers stranded. There is currently in India, I was reading today a news where thousands of migrant workers stranded in India cannot go back because the cost of the ticket to go to the Gulf has increased exponentially, an exponential cost in the airfare, which as a result of which migrant workers who did come back during the time of the COVID cannot return to their countries of destination, kind of thing, unless they pay for their own tickets, kind of thing. So these are some of the challenges that we have. And then we look at a world that is trying to come out of this situation of the COVID. Economies are looking at jump-starting, reopening and jump-starting the economy. You look at essential workers who have become a very key component of the workforce today and recognized today as essential workers. The whole question then in the context of new social contract is, what will change? What will change in the world of migration and migrant workers that we knew? For us who have been involved in this struggle, Farah and others, Dong, John, myself, Ambassador Grace and others, what do you think will change? What needs to change? You know, Dong has given the fundamentals of a new social contract. Can we move to make any of that happen? I am saying I seriously believe we can. Just because when you look at our history within the human community, kind of thing, our history has been one of, in times of crisis, we have come together and consolidated the best of our energies, the best of our values, the best of our thinking. And we have put up new institutions. Look at what came out of the Cold War, out of World War II. Look at what came out of World War I. Out of World War I, we got the ILO, this tripartite organization which focuses on the rights of workers. So in this moment of crisis, can we consolidate? That is going to be the big question we will have to ask ourselves, and that will be the litmus test of our generation. Were we the generation that was not able to get its act together in a time of crisis? Or will we be the generation that is able to get its act together in a time of crisis and move forward to build again a new world, or to reform what was broken? Can we do that? And I believe we can. This webinar today is a testimony of that. We have been journeying, many of us have been journeying in this for the last 2 years, something we never thought we would have done prior to 2020. To go online for meetings and things like that was not something that was within our worldview even. But we have been persistent in this for the last 2 years, and we have now entered our 5th round at the end of 2021. So I think there is value in all of us going back and taking some of these ideas and stirring the waters in our own spaces. Each one of us, whether we are students here, activists here, former government officials, academia, people of faith orientation, or human rights, labor rights activists, whoever of us in this current number of 219 in this webinar today, and others who have been part of us with this journey, all we need to do is take this back and stir the soil, the waters around us, and ask our leaders, be part of that process to say, let's see what can change. Let's see what can change in the world of work so that cliche slogans become real in our lifetime. And I'm saying cliche slogans like a worker is a worker is a worker everywhere. The principle of non-discrimination. Migrant workers are treated as national workers, period. They have the rights, including the right to organize and form and join trade unions like every other worker in the workforce. The right to decent work for migrant workers, not a race to the bottom of the barrel in very limited markets. Any academic, economic, academic development academic will tell you that there is enough if we come together to see how to have a program of governance of migration that will benefit us all, and migrants in particular. I think we've got to continue to think of this. How can more regular pathways be within this notion of migrant movement, deployment of migrant labor today? How can we expand some of that? How can those be protective and rights based? How can we have regularization for workers who are already there so that they can now be empowered and now have the tools and have the recognition and the identity to be able to give all of their potential without fear, without fear. The fundamental principles of the human rights framework was freedom from fear and freedom from want. Migrant workers today move largely because they want to be free from want. They want a livelihood. And very often they are caught up in a destination country, very fearful of their situation. What they need is freedom from fear. So, dear friends, I really think it's time for us, and I thank you all for being part of this journey. But I'm asking you, and we are asking you as co-organizers, all the co-organizers who have been part of this process, that let's find a way of taking this back to the ground, back to our homes, back to our communities, and let's stir the ground so that the hope that we envision is a hope that we can realize. I'll leave it at that, and I hope I will see you again we will see you again for the next in the series, which is going to be on race, another very difficult and hard discussion that we have to come to grips with in our time, and if possible, look at it with new eyes. Look at it with new eyes to bring that kind of change that we want. Once again, thank you, Dong, for stepping in and for doing a fantastic job in the moderation. Even if we lost our two speakers, you kept the conversation going, and for the people who stayed on, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Thank you, William. Sir, you said long.
William, good work. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Keep in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, William.
Yeah.
Sorry, I would like to know from the organizers, can we still in this room since the next webinar will be in 20 minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.